Going to turn the audio on.
If the selectmen can hear this, the people on Zoom have no audio.
Can people in the Zoom hear us now?
No.
Yes,
Yeah, Roger, got a thumbs up from Roger. Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, got it.
Roger, Stephen was saying the correction that we found in the May 2nd minutes was paragraph 6. It would actually be that Judith was talking about applying for a 4th grant, not a 3rd. But other than that, that's the only correction that we saw. So I would make a motion that we accept the minutes from May 2nd and May 8th. Right?
Yeah, I already made the motion in advance, I can do that, but that's.
Oh, I thought it was to review. I'm
All
sorry.
in
Yeah.
favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Yep.
Anyway.
Yes.
That's okay.
Do these.
We do it at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah, it was missing it.
Evening, John.
We're gonna open up get this quick out of the way, open up a public hearing for the acceptance of unanticipated revenue.
Right.
For $1,500 coming into the police station, for reimbursement of some training they had. A motion to open up. We need a motion, right?
Yes, we have. a
So
motion.
moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any discussion on this? Any problem with accepting it from the board?
No,
Yep.
happy to.
Make a motion to accept the $1,500 for reimbursement and put it back into the police department's budget. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Close the public meeting. We're actually going to jump to Corey Clark and the Goose Pond project, Goose Pond Dam project. Corey Clark is the engineer in charge of that project, as well as some other dam projects in the town, in the state, so. It's kind of fun to say. Thanks for coming up, Corey.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, members of the select board. And for the record, my name is Corey Clark. I'm chief engineer at New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services Dam Bureau. And so I'll just give a kind of a brief background on Goose Pond Dam, at least the dam that we all see today. And basically how we got to the point we're at right now. And so the dam was built in 1918 to replace an old wooden dam that was there at the time. It was built basically for the purposes of impounding water for downstream mill purposes, downstream in both Enfield and down Mascoma on the way down to Lebanon. And that was the intent and purpose of the dam for quite a few years. In 1928, some seepage was observed up at the dam, and they took care of that at the time by putting in a clay drain pipe, which is still in service today. And then in 1952 was kind of the first big rehabilitation of that site. The pond was drained at that time. The concrete works on the upstream side was completely redone, and some other work was also done to the tunnel that, or affectionately what we call the tunnel, that drains from the gates on the upstream side of that dam. The state of New Hampshire acquired the dam in 1969. And at that time, basically the companies that were using it for downstream mill purposes no longer needed the structure or the impoundment. So the state of New Hampshire took it over at that time. In 1980s, some additional drains were installed to help with seepage through that dam, and those are still in service as well. Following the 1952 rehabilitation, in 1990 was the first big rehab project that was done under the direction of the state of New Hampshire at the time Water Resources Board. And what that rehabilitation did was basically replacing deteriorated concrete on the upstream side of the dam. And also at that time, they installed 3 large wooden gates on the upstream side of the dam that are still in place today. Those gates have never been used, but they're basically 15 feet tall by 4 feet wide, and for the most part are underwater the entire summer season. But they do stick out a little bit during winter drawdown time. In 2012, the crew that we have here at the state of New Hampshire that does forest account maintenance was up there doing repairs to the concrete in the tunnel. And it was around that time frame that we noticed seepage coming into the tunnel from the walls. And so we did a investigation shortly thereafter with a series of test borings on the outside of the dam, encountered very loose soils around that concrete spillway structure, and actually discovered that one of the wells on the downstream side is artesian pressure. So basically the water in that well fluctuates, but during the summer months, it's a constant about 1 foot above the ground surface inside that well from the water pressure coming underneath the dam. In 2018, we took that a step further. We hired an outside consulting company to come in and do what we call, it's kind of a industry standard. They do a potential failure modes analysis. They look at the entire structure and try to figure out, okay, if this structure was to fail, what are the likely avenues of that failure? And the outcome of that investigation determined that most likely failure paths are basically seepage along the abutments on either side of that concrete outlet structure, or beneath the core wall. That concrete wall that you see a little bit of it on the surface that runs along the top of the dam is likely compromised in several locations, nor does it go all the way down to bedrock either. So there's likely high seepage gradients, water coming underneath the dam. And so the consultant at the time, basically determined that would be the highest likelihood of occurrence with a high likelihood of loss of life should that occur. And so taking a step back, Goose Pond Dam is a high hazard dam. And what that means in the state of New Hampshire, we have actually owned 60 high hazard dams. But what it means is, should that dam fail, either under a sunny day condition or during the 100-year flood event, that there would be a high likelihood of loss of life downstream. We do know that should Goose Pond Dam fail during the 100-year storm event, there would be at a minimum 121 structures affected, and those structures go all the way from down along Goose Pond Road, around the high school, across Route 4. Route 4 would be inundated with over 3 feet of water at that time, and then down the Mascoma River, into Enfield, inundating homes and structures in Enfield, and then actually down into Mascoma Lake, with additional impacts down Mascoma River continuing into Lebanon. So it's a pretty big inundation area, but the high hazard structure has nothing to do with the condition of the structure, just purely has to mean that if it was to fail, there'd be probable loss of life. Mascoma Lake Dam is another example of a high hazard structure that we own and operate. So as part of that, once we had that information, we went out there and installed a whole series of additional wells. If anyone's gone out there in the past couple of years, since 2018, you would have seen a lot of these orange, basically pipes sticking up with square boxes on top. And what that is in each one of those pipes, there's 2 wells, a deep well down into the foundation soils, a shallower well that's basically in the dam embankment itself, and measuring the water level as it comes through the dam. What we found was that several of the wells, the water in the deeper well is actually higher than the shallower well, meaning that the water pressure below the dam is higher than the water pressure within the dam. So somewhere there's a what we call a confining layer, basically a layer that's holding the water pressure down. And once you put a well or something through that, it gives it a source to come up. One of those wells, we actually found additional artesian pressures similar to the other well that was drilled in 2013, in which the water pressure was 4 to 5 feet above the ground surface. So there's one well down there that actually has a PVC pipe that's sticking out above that box, and that's because if we didn't have that, water would just be dribbling out of that box constantly. So with all that being said, we determined that the biggest deficiency at the site was this seepage issue and the nature of that seepage that could lead to internal erosion. One of the known failures of embankment dams, such as Goose Pond, is that uncontrolled seepage coming through the dam finds an avenue in which it can start eroding the dam from the inside out. And so you basically have something that starts small, probably like a little water boil coming out on the downstream side. But as that water starts to carry sediment and material through, it slowly starts picking up speed until you get a catastrophic failure of the dam. So what we decided to do to mitigate that was we've chosen an avenue in which we will be installing basically 15-foot deep foundation drains, if you will. We'll be taking out all the infrastructure that was put in 1928 and in the 1980s. We'll be going down 15 feet on the downstream side, putting in a drainage system to capture all that seepage coming through and bring it down to Goose Pond Brook. The other thing we are also going to be doing is installing 20 relief wells within that collection trench, if you will. Those wells will go down to bedrock and actually socket into bedrock. And so what those wells do is they create a barrier or a curtain. So any water that comes through gets captured by those wells, gets captured by that collection trench, gets brought up to the surface, and then we'll be monitoring that as it comes out at the end of those collection areas before it goes in. So we'll have that tied into our real-time monitoring system that we currently have up at Goose Pond to keep an eye on what's going on up there. And so what does that mean for the pond itself? Starting this October, we are going to be drawing the pond down. So same time as we always do, Columbus Day. So this summer recreation season will be normal for everybody on the impoundment and all the users. However, starting in Columbus Day this fall, we are going to be drawing down the impoundment, and we will keep going all the way down. Basically, it's going to be around a 20-foot drawdown from where the pond currently is. So I have a whole series of essentially maps that show the lake at what the lake is expected to be at different elevations. But given those maps, it appears to be roughly about a 2/3 reduction. So it's 640 acre impoundment. So it'll be down to somewhere around 200 acres when it's said and done. And the pond will stay at that level. So we will draw it down this fall. as long as our bidding and everything goes according to plan, we will have a contractor in place by this summer. So that way that contractor can start as soon as possible this winter. If we have a winter like we had last winter, there's actually probably quite a bit of work that the contractor can get done. And then completely just be pushing through next summer. So next summer, the pond will stay in the drained condition. The reason for that is essentially in order to get that trench in and all that infrastructure on the downstream side, we have to reduce the water that's coming into those locations. And so unfortunately, the only way to do that is to drain the pond and do that so that the contractor can get it done in the most expedited manner possible. It will stay drained down all through next summer. And then the intent is, given what our design engineers are saying, is that everything should be wrapped up in the winter of 2025, with the pond starting to refill in the beginning of 2025. We won't know that final estimated construction schedule until the contractor is in place, but that is the intent, is to have the contractor meet those obligations. And just as far as funding, just to touch on that a little bit, I know when I presented this project in 2021, we were looking at basically 3.5 million for the just the construction portion, but that price has actually gone up to 4.9 million as an estimate right now. It may even likely go higher when we actually put it out to bid this summer, and I won't know that until we get the bids. The design was paid for by state of New Hampshire capital appropriation funding, along with FEMA funds through the High Hazard Potential Dam Grant that FEMA has. And we were really fortunate at the Dam Bureau to have received, or actually been allocated, $30 million for the rehabilitation of high hazard dam, or the rehabilitation of state-owned dams all throughout New Hampshire through the American Rescue Plan appropriation that came through the federal government. The strings that are attached to that funding is that the money needs to be fully allocated by the end of 2024 and fully spent by the end of 2026. So we intend on having the construction portion of Goose Pond Dam being fully funded by these ARPA funds, as long as we meet all these time obligations, and given the schedule that I have laid out, I believe that we should be able to meet those obligations. So I know it's quite a bit of information relatively quickly, but I just wanted to kind of give a background as to how we got here and to open it up to any questions.
Any questions from the floor?
What's basically, what's that gonna do to Little Goose Pond too? Because we rely on that for fire protection.
It should not see a big impact of Little Goose Pond. It will fluctuate a little bit given both the drawdown period. Obviously, as you probably well aware, we have to, we throttle it during the drawdown period. We'll continue to do that. We're not going to just empty it, anything real quick. Next summer, during the construction project, whatever is coming into Goose Pond will essentially be fed back out through a series of bypass pipes at the construction site. So it really shouldn't be much of an impact from what you typically see in the summer season.
Okay.
So are you removing the entire spillway now and rebuilding that, or is it just the wells you're putting in?
So what we're going to be doing is, as part of, so the biggest problem is the wells, but obviously we're going to be drawn down, so we might as well tackle everything we possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing we are going to do is those 3 big wooden gates that have been in place since 1990 and have not been replaced or rehabilitated or anything. Those are going to be replaced with a concrete wall as part of this project. We're actually pulling those out because those were one of the issues that came out of the studies was, look, we have a huge risk just based on these wooden gates. Should one of those gates fail, we're going to lose the pond instantaneously down 15 feet. And then the pond's going to remain in that state. Never mind what might happen downstream from an unexpected gate failure. So we're going to be replacing those gates. We are going to be putting in a new gate. I believe it's somewhere in the order of 4 feet by 4 feet to help control during our winter drawdown period on the upstream side. And then the 2 low-level gates that we currently use to lower the pond we'll be rehabilitating both those gates. They are cast iron gates. The panels themselves should be fine, but we'll probably be putting on new stems and new operators and redoing the guides if we need to.
Mhm.
The other thing we're also going to be doing is the tunnel that was built to discharge all this water. We're going to be relining that entire tunnel with a foot of concrete. So a new foot of concrete is going to be going in there, relining the whole tunnel. As part of the project, one thing that will happen is the downstream slope of the embankment is going to be extended to some degree. So it's going to be flattened to help capture that whole drainage system. That is going to require some higher walls on that concrete structure. Those walls are going to require some more buttressing. So there's going to be some concrete work that's going to take place downstream. And we're replacing that little wooden bridge with an actual vehicular bridge at the top too, a concrete bridge across so that we can traverse the whole dam with vehicles.
What's the expected, so if you stay on schedule, I'm starting to refill on the winter of 25. What are you expecting for a refill period of time?
I would expect to be unlikely that the pond would be refilled to any extent at the beginning of the summer season. I would expect it's going to probably take, knowing what we know about Goose Pond and the time frame it requires, there will likely be impacts to the refill for the following season. So
You're talking 2 full seasons.
of impacts.
Of impact.
Yep.
So realistically, like 2027 before we start to see some real water back in.
2026 should be completely, I would imagine, completely normal, because we'll be rebuilding the summer 25. Rebuilding summer 2024,
Okay.
refilling summer 25. So by the spring of 2026, everything should be back to normal as we usually have it.
And what's that theory based on? Is it? Why do you think that that's a time frame that would be refilled?
That, given what we see on a typical year of a refill, so a typical year we draw that down anywhere 7-9 feet. We've done a little less of recent years, but we usually have to shut the gate and start refilling sometime in February or March, depending on what we're seeing. And by that time, we can capture it by this time. So we're refilling that upper 7 feet or so in that time frame. So given that we're going to be down 20 feet, we're thinking that, if we start refilling, then the nice thing is it takes less water to refill when you're lower than it is when you're higher. So if it takes anywhere from, 3 months to refill, kind of a normal period of time, then, it's likely going to take 6 months. And the biggest goal is trying to capture the refill period, capturing the spring runoff, capturing, storm events like we just had in this past month. Those sorts of things are really going to help trying to refill the pond. But obviously, if we end up in another drought situation, then things may be a little different.
How many dam projects you yourself currently involved in New Hampshire?
So currently, right now, under construction, we have Kilton Pond Dam just down the road in Grafton. That's being done with our in-house forces. We are also doing a dam, Cops Pond Dam, over in Tuftonboro right now using in-house forces. However, ongoing design projects that we currently have. So our intent is to do Goose Pond Dam next summer. The summer after, we have Mendham's Pond Dam over in Nottingham that we're going to be redoing. We also have several other design projects. We have one right up here, Dorchester, on the Baker 8 flood control facility off of River Road. That is that's a $1 million design project that's likely going to be constructed quite a ways out. But that's going to be a really big project when we hit it. It's basically rebuilding the whole spillway up there. And then we have, as part of this ARPA funding that we have we're looking at rehabilitating Murphy Dam, which is our biggest dam up in Pittsburgh, New Hampshire. In fact, some of you may have noticed the operators, they were basically big round hand crank operators with stainless steel stems that were sat on those 3 wooden gates up here at Goose Pond. We craned those out and installed those up at Murphy Dam so that we could bypass water for the penstock rehabilitation that we have to do up there, the 13-foot diameter penstock that we have to rehab underneath that. 100-foot tall dam. So we have that project going on, and yeah, we have quite a few other
So,
ones.
projects that you've already completed, I mean, what's the impact of, we're losing, we have a fair amount of people that are gonna lose Waterford property for a year or 2 years.
Right.
How's other communities face that, and
So
what's
other,
been the impact from that?
yeah, other communities, they have worked with the constituents to work out some sort of agreement with the taxes or something along those lines. I wasn't involved during those portions of those projects. During my tenure being involved directly with the projects, we haven't had those issues. We've had, last summer we had a Howe Reservoir down in the Harrisville area that was drained all summer long. Not nearly the same in number of homes, but it does cross Route 101. There's a big recreational impact by that construction project. And, the biggest thing that we try to do is just keep communities on notice as to, where things are at with the project. We invite folks to come to us whenever they have questions or anything like that. And we just try to be as open as we can to where we're at and how likely we can refill by different dates and going forward. It's a little difficult with Goose, given that we don't have a contractor selected yet.
Is that uncommon that you're at this point and don't have a contractor?
No, because actually what we were, before this federal money became available, we were going to have to use likely state capital funds. And with the current budget cycle, we wouldn't have those funds until after July 1st anyways. So we were intending on putting this out to bid this summer already. And the design just wrapped up last 2 months ago.
So you said the budget was 4.9 million. You said it'll likely go over that.
It will, yeah.
Is the state committed to whatever it is?
Yeah, we are. So fortunately, that $30 million, we have money in there, not only allocated, we have about 5 million set aside for this project, but we also have funds that aren't encumbered right now that we can shift if needed.
Pay for property tax.
Well, it'll definitely cover the project if depending on what it comes in at. So
What other, if any, what other options did you guys look at?
so we looked at the first option was, can we get away with a winter drawdown? Not as impactful, or get away with no drawdown at all. Given that we're already seeing artesian pressures, the minute we put a shovel in the ground, we know water's just going to be bubbling out all over the place. And so we looked at, so we did some modeling with the different drawdown periods. Could we ratchet it down, just hold a winter drawdown season, try to retain as much water as we could. Unfortunately, the soils are so porous that any water that remains at a higher elevation from where they have to be digging, and there will be, it's still 15 feet down, it's still lower than the pond bottom where it's going to be. We found that, there's really no feasible way to get that work done by keeping the water there. So the next question we looked at was, can we build a cofferdam upstream? Many of you will see that, we have a cofferdam in place down here at Kilton Pond Dam. Given the scale and the length of Goose Pond, we have, Goose Pond Dam's over 1,200 feet long. So we're looking at, roughly almost a quarter-mile long cofferdam that we'd have to install somewhere, some distance upstream to the middle of the impoundment. Unfortunately, the soils we're dealing with here, unlike, Kilton Pond, the concrete sits right on bedrock. You can seal things off relatively easily. However, here at Goose Pond, the soils are so pervious that even if you were to move that cofferdam some distance upstream, you still see, the water pressure is still being pushed through. The other issues we run into with doing a cofferdam of that nature is Goose Pond Dam's a high hazard dam. I have to keep those 121 structures downstream, reduce their risk as much as possible. That cofferdam then becomes a high hazard structure. So the amount of engineering effort and construction effort that it takes to do Goose Pond Dam is almost going to be the same amount just to do the cofferdam in place. So not only does the time frame change, because it's going to take a year to put that cofferdam in, a year to do the Goose Pond work, a year to remove that cofferdam. So you're tripling your time frame of impacts, but you're also quite possibly tripling your budget at that point in time, trying to put that cofferdam in place. And the other impacts too is ideally, like we did down at Kilton, is to drain the pond to put the cofferdam in. So either way, you're still having those impacts, because if you try to put a cofferdam in under full pond, then it's just an exorbitant amount of cost because you're working from barges the entire time. And we would have to get property rights to actually access that cofferdam from abutting properties from Goose Pond Road or other accesses. So we looked at several different avenues, and unfortunately, this was the best one to try to shrink the time frame as much as possible and reduce the risk not only to folks downstream, but also reduce the risk to the contractor, so that we can get a contractor, because the last thing we want is to have the risk so high that nobody's going to bid on it and they're just going to say, look, I can't get that work done. So we have to try to do everything we can to reduce that risk so it's actually constructible to a contractor.
Is there any feasible way that refilling can be done quicker, or is it strictly relying on Mother Nature? And
The only thing that could, speed things up, if we have a bone dry summer next year and that contractor is able to crank and, doesn't run into any unknowns out there. And, we don't have any other construction issues or anything else or weather related issues, then there might be a time frame that
so construction could be shortened.
shortened, but I think this is a pretty aggressive schedule to begin with. So hopefully, we can work within those timeframes.
Yeah, it sounds as though we hope to work with, but reality is it's going to be hard to meet the timeframes.
I think the construction timeframe should be manageable, even with, because there is some contingency built into the schedule. But I think the biggest unknown will really be during the refill process as to what we have for runoff that particular year. And if Mother Nature cooperates, or if it just takes a longer period of time, but it will refill eventually. I mean, it was drained in 1990. It was able to refill obviously after that point in time, same in 1952.
So back to John's question,
Yep.
when you're in the refill process, what happens to the Old Goose Pond and downstream where you're holding back?
So what we have to do is we do have to bypass some water to keep the downstream downstream flows sustainable. So an example right now is down at Kilton Pond. We have a 6-inch pump, even though we're trying to refill, we have a 6-inch pump bypassing water into that downstream reach. So that, the downstream wetlands and other ecological or even residential wells or groundwater impacts aren't felt by the refilling process of that.
Because that's one of the things that I have some concern about is, not only the tax base that lives around the pond,
Mhm.
which like we were discussing before the meeting, really, that's where I have to be concerned with, right? So what are we gonna do as a municipality? But also, I know from living on Goose Pond Road for 50 years that there are some dug wells there. I mean, artesians are, once you start draining and really taking that much water away, I would have to think that they could be impacted as well. But what happens, and let's just say that my neighbor's well goes dry. Who's responsible for that? Are they responsible for it? Because
Yes.
it's on their property, so if it goes dry, they just have to pay somebody to dig them an artesian well?
Right. I mean, in the state of New Hampshire, we don't regulate private wells. So it's really on, it is on the homeowner, whether they decide, their dug well goes dry for one reason or another, and they decide to put in artesian or, make a deeper artesian. It's the homeowner's initiative to do those things.
So am I led to believe that I live on Goose Pond Road? So my land borders the river. So am I led to believe that river's gonna be dry?
It should not go dry.
It
No.
should not go
No.
dry.
Yeah.
Because I worry about stagnant water or,
Yeah, so during the whole construction process and even actually during the refill process, there'll always be water coming out of Goose Pond that's flowing in there.
that will keep that river going.
Yep, exactly.
At least something in it, right? That's what we were talking about earlier. When you guys come in, I was just chatting with him a bit and it seems as though there's enough of a flow from the tributaries that come into Goose Pond where there's some sort of water moving. And we had a meeting a few weeks ago, and this was one of the questions that I asked as well, right? So it seems as though it may not have as much water in it as we're used to, but there will be something.
Yeah.
Really, the hopes are that it's not dry ground.
Exactly. Yes.
Because there's a concern about, there's all kinds of geese that come in there, ducks that come in there, loons.
Yeah.
What's gonna happen with the loons? It's some conservation,
So as part of the whole permitting
Wow.
process, we have to work with, and not only, the Wetlands Bureau at DES, but we also have to work with Fish and Game and the Army Corps of Engineers. So we've been working with Fish and Game, for several years, trying to figure out impacts and everything else. And, you know, if Fish and Game sees an impact, they'll make sure that it's reflected in the wetlands permit that and that permitting process is still ongoing, but it'll be reflected in the permitting process. One of the things that they always typically require is the refill rate of how fast we can refill, and trying to, you know, also keep the downstream reach with water flowing in it. And then if there's any other wildlife or ecological impacts, Fish and Game will take those into consideration as well, whether that's additional stocking after the pond is refilled or something of that nature. After
so the
pond.
fish that are in there are probably gonna die. Or is there gonna be enough water in there to keep those fish living?
There likely will be. I mean, there'll certainly be fish that move downstream during the process. However, at least in my experience in ponds that we've had to drain down to a similar extent, is that given that Goose Pond is a warm water fishery, those fish species, when the pond refills, there's a lot less competition, so they bounce back relatively quickly.
All right,
Basically, he's thinking the same thing I am. The only good news is there's really no fish in Goose Pond anyway. Anybody's ever fished it, real life.
well, they go out there and end up trading.
Something lighthearted, but
Mr. Clark.
Yeah.
You're probably not the right person to ask this, but given your experience, I'm wondering either through DRA or Fish and Game, or perhaps another agency. Is there any precedent for the state to assist the town in terms of making up for lost revenue from property taxes, whether it's abatements or whatever?
There, to my knowledge, there hasn't been in the past, and I'm thinking the rationale for this, I wasn't involved in some of those previous decision-making processes, is that when Goose Pond initially was being designed, the state of New Hampshire, the residents of New Hampshire spent $750,000 just on the design of it. And so I believe that it's the state's understanding that the residents of all of New Hampshire are paying for this particular project on this particular water body. So that is, that in essence is the state's contribution to trying to, create this water body for not only the residents to enjoy, but also all the other public users of New Hampshire.
Well, I also would think that there is a potential impact in terms of revenue that might be available to the state. Say through rooms and meals, through other tourism coming into Goose Pond that would impact the state as well. So is that?
Quite possibly. I think it would be hard to quantify that number, if they're. Because, in Goose Pond, for instance, I'm not aware of any, hotels or anything that would generate rooms and meals tax or anything of that nature. So I think it would be hard to quantify that. I mean, obviously there is an economic loss when the pond is drained, whether that's from, fishing licenses or, other things that, people would solely use Goose Pond. It's likely they'll go somewhere else, whether down to Mascoma or something like that. But certainly the biggest impact is to the towns from having that pond drained. But once again, the state's intent is to have that completely refilled and not have those impacts for another 50, 60, 100 years if possible.
Right, but for a fairly short period of time, it could be a significant impact to a town that we're not ahead of. Right.
Correct. And it's something that it will impact Canaan. I understand that. However, one thing that we're trying to do the best we can at the Dam Bureau is we're trying to manage 270 dams, 60 high hazard structures, and in quite a number of those structures, we're actually looking at potentially removing those structures permanently. So we have impacts in other communities in which we're approaching the community and saying, we're sorry, but this dam that is owned by the state of New Hampshire is being removed permanently. So we are starting those talks with those communities to say, now's the time to discuss, how is this site going to look after it's done? In instances, such as the great example is, while it wasn't a state-owned dam, it was a municipal decision, but the Great Dam in the town of Exeter, working with them, trying to figure out how's this landscape going to look after the dam is removed, to instances, while once again, it wasn't a dam project, but the town of Franklin with the Whitewater Park, and trying to work with the communities to rehabilitate that. So yeah, we certainly understand it's an impact, but there are other communities throughout New Hampshire that are feeling the same sort of pain because of, how we have to manage the resources that we have.
Just a comment. When Corey came to our annual meeting a couple of years ago at the Goose Pond Lake Association, obviously nobody was thrilled about this news. But when they explained the project to be in a high-risk dam and the loss of potential life, there wasn't much we could do. But I will say, a few years ago, I took the Canaan tax printout, 34 pages, and added up the houses on Goose Pond. It's only gotten worse for the town at this point because we have 12 new luxury home, multi-million-dollar homes going in on that one side. The people on Goose Pond account for about 30% of the revenue in the town of Canaan. Just the people on the lake, not even on the rest of Goose Pond Road.
And 3 years ago, it was around 18%, right?
So at the time, nobody was getting, they didn't, we kind of kept our cool because they didn't even have a design, they didn't have a contractor, there was no reason for us to get all fluffed up yet. Now that it looks like it's really coming to, the project is coalescing, I'm sure we're gonna reopen the conversation on Goose Pond about what are we gonna do in approaching the town for some kind of relief. If it's gonna be, if this thing struggles into 2 years, every property on that lake is, the assessment is double or triple what the house would be if it was in town. And that's, 2 years without a lake property, I mean, it's inconvenient, but it's also pretty unfair. So again, I don't want to get the cart before the horse, but please, but I have to let everybody know we're gonna have to reopen this conversation.
Think of all that extra waterfront you're gonna have though.
Pardon?
Think of all that extra waterfront footage you're gonna
It's a
have.
huge beach, yeah.
So again, I mean, it's just in the interest of the transparency. We didn't get too worked up about it 2 years ago, but now we're probably, some people might.
I think it's a subject that we need to be talking about.
Then Tom's question was fantastic because that's exactly what we were wondering. Probably some of us were wondering if there's some kind of state relief for that.
I mean, I get that it's an inconvenience and nobody wants to lose the lake. But nobody on Goose Pond is gonna sell their money or their homes for any less than they're gonna sell them for today. That's all gonna come back.
Hope so.
Well, why wouldn't it?
I don't know.
There's no water on the planet anymore. That's
I
my
paid
concern.
an enormous amount of money for a house in town. I can't imagine having to pay more than that.
Right.
Because people are inconvenienced about water for 2 years.
Well, so I see, and I understand what you're saying, but my thoughts are it's more than the inconvenience. When you start, when you're across the country and you're researching where do we want to move to have our beautiful luxury retirement home or a camp.
I
On
get
the
that,
pond,
Dan, but
right?
also, if you don't do it and it floods and we lose all of this, then we're really screwed.
So I understand, and I understand more than I did a few weeks ago. The meeting that we had here a few weeks ago really opened my eyes to the extent and the reason why we have to repair this dam, right? But the other side of it is we've already had some of those residents on Goose Pond come to us and tell us that they are starting to put together a coalition of people who are going to have a lawsuit against the town of Canaan for abatement. So
how do we do that?
I don't
How
know.
do we, as people that are just ordinary citizens that don't live on a lake, how are we able to deal with that? Because my feeling is too bad. That's the price you pay for living on a lake with a dam.
So let's tell that to all those people that come in and want their money. And I think that
But I
the end
think that's
result,
got to be part of it, Dan. I
Right.
think that has to be part of it.
The problem is though, I think that the problem we're gonna run into, where common sense, I guess, or lack of ability to do anything else isn't gonna override what their legal options are.
Right,
So when that happens, legal
Canaan's
options
supposed to
win?
just Out of business because people are
No, it will
upset
shift-
about a dam?
it will shift the tax burden to other people in
Yeah.
town, so we'll still need to collect the same amount of money. it just
Exactly.
Temporarily would shift it.
But if the people that don't choose to live on a lake or can't afford to, and all of a sudden that burden is shifted onto my shoulders. And I'm gonna say, I don't have any money to do that. You know, are we gonna have a coalition to fight with the town? I mean,
So that's my
that
concern.
seems insane.
Is that it just starts spiraling and spiraling, and in the meantime, there's no money there to take care of any of it.
Well, if I may, I think there are two issues here. One is that because of New Hampshire's reliance on property taxes. And because that property tax includes what essentially amounts to a view tax.
Yeah.
So you pay extra for a better view, for lakefront property, etc. If you're taking that away, even for a short period of time, you're essentially creating a penalty on a property owner. And my question is frankly directed at the issue of what we don't want to see in this town is an impact on our budget that we can't afford. And we certainly don't want to see a situation where one citizen in one part of town is pitted against another citizen in another part of town. And this is a moment when I think, frankly, the state ought to step up, and frankly, whether it's Canaan or every other community in the state, you know, this is significantly for a community like Canaan that is already, frankly, struggling financially, economically. Maybe there's an opportunity here for the state to recognize that we're significantly different than Exeter. We're significantly different than Franklin. We're significantly different than Hanover. And maybe even Enfield. The fact of the matter is, there are economic situations, I think, here that perhaps the state should be taking a look at. Perhaps it should be a statewide program. Perhaps the state should consider the fact that the state owns these dams. And I don't know what process that was and what the decision was made. Probably makes some sense. But at this point, if the state owns the dams, no one is arguing, at least I'm certainly not arguing that, you know, the work doesn't need to be done to protect, you know, to protect folks downstream and property and certainly human life. The work needs to be done. But there are also consequences to that work that I think the state as well as the town needs to recognize. And for the state to simply say, hey, tough luck, guys, for the next year or two, you're just going to have to eat this. You're going to create feelings, hard feelings that I think you can already see here this evening. And the state, in my personal opinion, the state ought to recognize that and take steps to correct it. And frankly, I think statewide.
So to the point, I mean, 30% of the tax base is about $750,000. You're not losing 100% of your value, so you're still gonna, you know, what percentage of that are you losing because of 25%? So, you know, that brings that number down to 300,000, maybe even less than that, 200,000. That's a small portion tax point for, it's very important to this town, but on a project that's going to be $5 million, $6 million, that's not much added to it. To Tom's point, where the state, you know, to compensate those property owners and not impact the rest of the town. You know, it's a huge impact to us.
Mhm.
You know, it's 10% of our, 10% of our town budget.
Yeah.
But on a project of that magnitude, it's not that much more. It'd be something to consider. I
Yeah.
think, and
I would also recommend reaching out to the town of Barrington and the town of Nottingham. They went through this on the first phase of the Mendham's Pond reconstruction project. And once again, I'm not sure how they were able to work things out, but I know that they.
Is there somebody in DRA that could assist us as well? with an argument?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know.
I know, or Corey's like, I wish I had somebody sit beside me. and so
Well, I mean,
can answer this.
ultimately, I don't necessarily disagree with this discussion, but I think it's, this is at a legislative level. That, we are allocated the funds that we are allocated for, and we have to work within certain state statutes of how we go about using those funds. And, how those what those funds are applied for. And at this point in time, I don't know of an avenue of, the Dam Bureau supplying additional funds to anybody else. But there might be, and I just don't know about it off the top of my head.
Any other questions in the thoughts? Corey, thanks for your time.
All right.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you, everyone.
Hopefully we'll-
Yeah, of course.
And are you planning on, you said you're gonna be doing public meetings?
So one thing we have to do under state statute 482 semicolon 13, we have to come up and do another public meeting. And that has to be done within 30 days of the drawdown period. So likely later on this summer, early fall, we'll do another meeting, which we come up and have a similar discussion like this. And at that point in time, we should have a contractor in place and everything else so that we can really kind of nail down some of the things. I also have, this is kind of an example of what the pond may look like. The middle circle being the lowest drawdown location, and I have a whole bunch of these for folks if they're interested. Just so people are aware of what it
Property was people.
may look like.
That map really helps.
Yeah, and that's what I realized after
Keep it
that.
Down a little bit, it's not gonna be completely dry, it's gonna be 1/3 the size.
And actually, I'll leave these to you folks too. This is pretty, it hasn't gone out to permitting yet, but I know it's small, but basically here's the design plans and.
Is that one set right there? Is that?
Yeah, he's got them up back, Mike.
That's one set, and then this is the same presentation I gave to the Lake Association.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. We appreciate you coming in. Corey.
Yeah, any questions, anything, let me know.
And so we will obviously know when you're coming back to do your next public meeting.
Yeah, we have to do a public notification, and we found working with the select board is usually the best avenue for doing that.
Yeah.
But we have to post it in the paper and everything else, so.
Okay.
We'll be in
So-
contact with that.
Yeah, we'll do that. And one of us, I'm sure, will shoot you an email. Have you already been in touch with him via email?
Yeah.
All right. So that way, maybe you can just keep us in the loop.
Yeah, certainly.
Keep us in your email chain so we know what's going on.
Yes,
Yeah, I appreciate it.
No
Okay.
problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Corey.
Hey, Stephen, we had a question in the Zoom chat. Are there any copies of the plans available to the public?
Yeah, so Corey just gave me a set of the plans. I'll make a couple of copies. I'll leave one in the foyer of the town office. Just so people can come in and take a look at it.
The only request I make is just put not for construction on the front of that, because they haven't been permitted yet, or even though they say final on them,
Okay,
there may be some tweaks and changes
okay,
before it goes out to bid.
all right.
But that will give you the 99.9% gist of the project. So,
Okay. Awesome.
thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we have a presentation on the transfer station bridge. And just some potential for New Hampshire DOT funding.
Yeah, so.
I just want to make that share. Or maybe an example. Seems not to.
Big point. Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thank you. All right.
Hello there.
Hey, how are you?
Good,
Good,
good. Just to be clear, just introduce you.
Yeah, so I am Chris Fournier with HEB Engineers, and we are working for the town on several bridge projects. And here to primarily talk about the transfer station road bridge. So we performed some design work on that bridge so the town could send it out and get a quote from a contractor, and that quote came in higher than expected from them. And so alternatives were
discussed, and in discussion with New Hampshire DOT, they have offered to enter the bridge into the state bridge aid program and cover 80% of the costs of the project.
80% of the design and engineering. cost.
Design and engineering and construction.
No, I thought this construction was 100.
No, this one is
Oh, it's
80%.
80, okay.
Yeah. So the town put the Clark
Clark Pond Road.
Pond Road Bridge in a long time ago, early in my career.
Yeah.
Probably a decade or so ago, when we've talked about village flooding and some of the storm issues. It was also identified that that bridge wasn't the highest priority in town, but it was left as a placeholder, and that was communicated with DOT for a while. They're pretty practical in the state bridge aid program, so they allow towns to switch bridges if one becomes a higher priority than another, as long as they're similar magnitude and costs.
Okay.
So in this instance, transportation has been sort of allocated for that spot for a while as a potential, but DOT is ready to sort of pull the trigger on that and move forward in that manner if the town agrees to do so.
Right. Do you,
So what was the estimate on the bridge?
yeah. that's
Total
what I was
cost?
gonna ask.
Sure. So
Plus engineering,
It was about 750,000 for just the bridge.
and then how much was engineering on top of that?
I was gonna say 20 something or other 30.
yes, I think we're only that much into it at this point.
30.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Yeah, it's under 50 for sure.
So the 750 is like the bridge itself, just the parts, pieces, components, all of that. you know?
Correct. And
That
that
doesn't
construction.
include construction, does it?
includes construction as well of the bridge structure, but not the roadway realignment and approaches. So the design we talked about was locating the bridge in a different location.
Yeah.
So the approach roadway construction is not included in that
Okay.
figure. Yes, correct.
I didn't know.
But
But hang on, there's a key thing to remember, that bridge would not, the $750,000 bridge would not get any DOT money. It would be all our own.
Prior, yeah.
Yeah, the prior design.
Right.
This
But
one-
now it's 80% of that's being covered, is that?
yeah, if the town accepts that
Yeah.
offer
Gotcha.
from DOT, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
And what's the timing on that?
The timing is as quick as the town can progress through that process.
Oh,
State bridge aid program.
okay.
Yeah.
So typically, what are we looking at? I mean, is that,
Um,
are we looking at? 5
multiple
to-
years,
What?
about 3 years
3 years?
till construction. Yeah.
So that would just replace the Clark Road Bridge with this one, or it doesn't impact the plans for the Potato Road or the Gristmill Bridge? Okay.
Correct. Those remain as is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Essentially, we get. This is a bit hyperbolic, but we're getting a new bridge every year for the next couple of years.
As long as we can come up with a 20%.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
So we're talking about transfer station bridge, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then-
Primarily
the
that one.
Clark?
No, that was just a placeholder at DOT that
Oh,
they had
okay.
in
All right.
that they're willing to swap out
I understand. Okay.
for transfer station road.
They had that one there, ready to kind of offer us that 80% coverage and realize that's not the priority, this one is, right? Yeah. Okay. So I'll be honest with you, there has been so much talk about different bridges and so many different amounts of money that we have and don't have and have to come up with. I've got a pretty good handle on where we're at, but if I'm not the only one in the room that's a little bit lost, I'll be shocked. So, can you give me a comprehensive kind of rundown of where we're at with the bridge systems in Canaan and when they're expected to kind of be repaired at this point?
Yeah, I think
Just get a good
think I
overview
can
tonight so we can,
with
best we can, right?
without
So-
trying to confuse it, because there are other potential funding opportunities the state has
Mhm.
floated for the town of Canaan. So additional money is potential.
Okay,
So as it stands today,
right, as it stands right now.
Potato Road Bridge
Okay.
is slated to wrap up design and go out to bid this winter
Mhm.
for construction next year.
Okay.
The state is covering 80% of the design costs and 100% of construction through the bipartisan infrastructure law.
So 80%. So let me ask you a question real quick. Is there any way that you could put this into a summary and email it to us?
Absolutely. Yep.
So I don't have to sit here and try to write as fast as you're talking.
Sure.
And not that, don't get
No
me wrong,
problem.
you're doing
Yeah.
great, but I'm scratching. If you can just kind of tell us now so everybody can hear, and I've got an understanding, or we, and then if you could shoot us an email with this kind of summarized, so I know what the heck I'm talking about.
Yes.
That would be cool. All right, so 80% of the design, 100% of construction for Potato Road
In 2024.
in the next year. Okay. Okay.
How long would that take to be completed?
That's a single season project.
Okay.
So anticipated to be that good construction season. Yep, in 2024.
Okay,
Um,
I'm ready.
Okay, so next one we could talk about is the Grist Mill Hill Road Bridge, which DOT approved our contract and the town also approved our contract. So we are just in the infant steps of the design process for that bridge project. Again, that is 80% DOT funding for design. And again, 100% of the construction costs covered by DOT.
Is there anything foreseeable that changes that 100% coverage? So one of the things I'm learning is one day you have money, the next day you don't. You have money, the next day you don't. So what are the variables that we're gonna look at and say, I wish we would have thought of that? Because now we don't have 100% coverage on the bridge. Are there any?
Sure, yeah, I mean, you've signed, the town has signed a municipal agreement with the state. And that funding is described in that municipal agreement.
Okay,
The state is seeing high inflation for construction costs. So they do anticipate running out of that federal money.
Yeah.
But what they are doing, what they're committed to doing, at least verbally, and this is a little preliminary, is to just supplement what they have committed to with state funds.
I see.
So they're gonna stick to their word
Okay.
of 100% funding for construction, despite increased costs of construction in
Okay.
future years.
Okay, so basically they're gonna take up the coverage of the increased amount of construction.
Yep.
So-
Yep, and the town and state have signed an agreement stating that.
So the only way, so basically, if the state runs out of money before we get this project done, and just for the sake of saying the original bid was $10 and now it's 15. And the state's out of money, we gotta come up with that other $5.
No, they're,
They've committed that state's committed, they're gonna cover it, so.
Verbally though, right?
that's a municipal agreement, no.
We have a contract that says they will do this.
Okay. Okay,
So what's the target date to actually start construction for this mill? Do we know yet, or?
That's a good question. We don't
Okay.
know at this point. Grist Mill, so our first task on our plate is an engineering study.
Mhm.
So to decide what to do with that bridge, if it needs to be rehabilitated in place or replaced in place or completely relocated, those ideas have been floated. So our engineering study is going to figure out which alternative is the best for the town. Those have a wide range of timeframes for construction. But you could expect, again, about a 3-year process. On any of that to get towards to construction. So it's not right after Potato Road, but soon thereafter.
okay.
18 months later. Okay.
And at one point, Grist Mill was slated to be replaced before Potato Road and then it changed, or no?
No, not that I'm aware of.
But Grist Mill did move up the list because of weight
Oh, then maybe
constraints
that's
now,
what
and
we
we
did.
reduced the rate.
Yeah.
The weight on it, so.
Yeah.
From a town standpoint, the
I
state didn't
remember that
require it to
was
us. so, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
all right.
And then following Grist Mill will be Transfer Station Bridge.
Yes, so transfer station bridge, if the town chooses to go into the state bridge aid program. Because we've already progressed design and town has funded that, that works still good and we can move on from that. It's likely that would slot in between Potato Road and Grist Mill. You know, so we're already ahead of,
Right.
way ahead of where we would be on, where we are on Grist Mill Hill. So it may actually slot in the season between those projects.
So the bridge that's on Clark is Clark Hill, is that what it is?
Clark Pond.
Like,
Clark
Road.
Pond. So what happens with that? And can that ever get back into the program? When you say it was only a placeholder,
Sure, yep. That may actually be a class 6 road. I think that's,
It's,
Don't
we have
quote
to
me on
figure
that,
out
yeah.
which type of road it is, whether it's a class 6 road that we do some maintenance on. Or a class 5 town highway, which would get it.
So is it actually River Road or is it Clark Pond Road?
They call it Clark Pond Road, but think of it this way, in terms of. What road it's on or what class road it's on. Basically, Clark Pond Road was, I'm just gonna make that up, like 5th in line to be done. It gave up its spot and moved back to 20th in line
Right.
and gave, in transfer station, came up and took spot number 5. It's still on the list, it's just farther behind, it's farther back.
but the state evaluates it to see which one is a higher priority and you're not just taking our word because we want the transfer station. I guess that's what I want to know. I don't know anything about the Clark Pond Bridge, so
Yeah.
what happens that you allow us to move this up? And place this and then bump that at our back out, like.
Sure, yeah, I mean, the state is cognizant of the town's priorities. So transfer station, you know, has
So,
access to the transfer station and wastewater treatment facility. It's of pretty high importance. They monitor it for safety also.
okay,
So it's
it's good to know.
yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And the way we monitor it for safety is they actually do traffic counts that calculate how many trucks, cars, buses, things like that. Cars, they're a little less worried about because even a really fairly badly constructed bridge can hold up cars. Whereas heavy trucks, snow plows, things like that stress out those bridges and cause it to degrade a little more quickly.
I just think that there's concern on behalf of the conservation committee that the town not do work on the Clark, near Clark Pond without. When they not just go in there and start doing work because of the ecosystem there. So I just.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
There's some confusion on that right now, but.
Yeah, I personally don't think we should be building bridges.
Right.
So I'm with you. Yep, yep. I mean, we've got to maintain things, yes. But there's a, you know, we got to draw the line, and I agree between maintaining and where you start getting into where you're over your head a bit.
So is that the 3 that are in the list that are close to the top?
That's the 3. Do you want the sort of curveball potential?
Sure.
So in the discussion of getting transfer station in and funded in the state bridge aid program, the state did bring up the fact that it's been long discussed to address the overflow culverts on Potato Road and raise the road where it overtops all the time. They've floated and in a quite unofficial fashion at this point in time that be incorporated with the Potato Road Bridge project. And actually solve the
And
Potato Road flooding all at once.
who would pay for that?
The state is potentially rolling that in.
Because
That's not a curveball, it's actually a good.
right.
No, it's not, but
Okay.
there's a few curves.
But there are some curves to get there, right? So, I don't know, have you ever been able to actually put eyes on that area when it's flooded?
Yes,
You have?
yes.
All right,
Yep.
so it just flooded a couple weeks ago, right? So, you know, my thoughts are, and again, don't claim to be an engineer, all of the above, but do have a little bit of common sense, and you can fix that bridge all of you want. It's still gonna flood, right? So now we're gonna have water that's flooding over and wrapping around a brand new bridge. So my thoughts would be if, or I guess let me rephrase that and say kudos to the state for realizing that the bridge is the result of the flooding possibly, but it's not the reason for the flooding, right?
Mhm.
So what you're saying is that what is the likelihood that they're going to fix that and raise the road with it? What is the likelihood?
Yeah, I think they, what I would recommend, so the curveballs in this is that the bridge project right now has that federal funding in it, right? So the state is trying to spend that in a timely fashion. Adding that other crossing, the overflow culverts and raising of the roadway slows that project down.
Sure.
So it's gonna delay that a full year,
Okay.
to add that in, potentially.
How much is the flooding due to the constriction of the Potato Road Bridge? Is it being
None.
increased? None?
None.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is-
No, it's just the road's low.
And the flood doesn't impact any homes, correct? It's just the fields? Is
Well,
that-
It's just the usage of the road.
Access of the.
Yep.
And it undermines the road over time too, so. Okay,
All right.
So it was, yeah, this was unofficially floated by DOT. If the town has interest in that, I would recommend reaching out and expressing that interest. And I can direct you in the right directions for that.
Please.
do, can you send me an email?
Yep.
Yeah.
You can send it down to admin, so, yeah.
Yeah, I emailed the state right after the phone call to document the fact that they offered that.
Okay.
So we can do that. And the last curveball, if I may, the railroad trestles,
Yep.
long discussed with regards to the village flooding. EDA funding was discussed for a long time for that, which that EDA funding pot was expended.
Yeah.
A new version, a new round of that particular funding has opened.
Okay.
There's about I believe $108 million for the Philadelphia region, which we are part of. For this EDA funding, and they have offered to meet with the town in June.
In June.
Yep.
Okay. And how do we secure that meeting?
I can direct you in the right direction as well.
Okay.
Yeah, please.
Please
Yep.
do that.
Yes.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
That's good news.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, I
fine.
like it. Thank you.
Yeah, we've been talking about all of these projects for a long time and trying to piecemeal. That's why it's a little confusing of trying to do
Trying to
what we
pull it all
absolutely
together.
can to pull it all together in many ways with many different types of funding, and
It's just juggling everything, right?
it's kind of coming together,
Mhm.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I can see that as someone, right, we've been involved with it a little bit, I can see that it's still a ways out, right? But we're starting to get all these little pieces plugged in. So, and again, you'll send us an email kind of going over all of that stuff with us. Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank
who to call, who to email on each one of these two.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you. Very good. Awesome.
Can I get a card from you?
Yep.
Have it. Thank
Any
you very
questions
much.
from the floor?
That's nice. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I request that the list of bridges be sent to the Conservation Commission, conservation@canaannh.org?
Say that again, so I'm sorry.
The
Sure.
prioritized list of bridges for the
Yep.
town as it stands, could it be shared with the Conservation Commission?
Sure, so you want to write it down, it's Potato Road Bridge,
Dan
Yes.
had requested it through email,
yep,
so if it could also be emailed to us, that'd be great. Potato Road runs over wetlands. And Clark Pond does as well. So it's just something that we like to keep on the radar.
Absolutely.
This is actually less of a question than just a point of information for the board. And Dan, I think this was before your time in the planning board, but Andy Van Abs, the late Andy Van Abs, one of his projects that he worked on for the planning board was to literally assess every single road in town. And there's a list that the planning board has, I have a copy of it. That,
it's on the website.
yeah, so it is available. And so, for example, Clark Pond Road, at least in that list, is listed as a class 5 road.
I see. All right,
Just,
thank you.
Yeah.
Perfect.
it's a good, as Stephen says, it's a good
tool.
good tool, good resource on the town website.
Nice.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it. Nice to see you. Back with more good news.
Yeah,
I'll try to do it better.
um,
You could bring some money for that damn project.
Next item is we have a request to authorize green burials in all Canaan cemeteries. We have somebody here for that. We'll wait till Nick gets back.
What do we mean by green burials? That was.
So
I don't-
green burial is to the finest point of the law, putting somebody in the ground, basically wrapped in a sheet. No embalmation, no nothing, no box, no nothing.
I see.
Go back to the area.
Yeah,
So-
I-
Do you have somebody that sent in something about green burials
Yes,
or
when the Salvos asked, is he,
Dennis
Dennis is not here.
is not here?
But I also want to mention, this is just the start of the process. I just want to get a consensus of the board that, yes, you're amicable with moving forward this. There's nothing wrong with doing this according to our cemetery stuff, but we have to check with the state and see if there are other legal ramifications and what else we have to do, if anything, for our cemeteries.
And I had a question from someone in town that wants to know if we have a policy that allows green burials on private property, on their own property.
Okay.
Or private property burials and all.
I don't know. They understood that it needed to be at least 100 feet away from the waterway. They had ample land and wanted to know.
All right, I will work on that. We're trying to figure that out.
Yeah, it's
What we have
it's an
working.
interesting topic to me, but it seems like there are tons of things that are gonna have to be checked into and buttoned up.
Yeah,
We-
I mean, like I said, it's. Do you have an idea of how many towns in New Hampshire now allow green burials?
I know Hanover and Lebanon do, but beyond that, I don't know.
I know in the town my mom lives in, they've sort of, they're not doing it in the general cemeteries, they're designated a separate space for green burials.
Interesting.
So-
I was just-
I was just gonna, there are a bunch of people writing in the chat box.
I was just gonna say, I think, Stephen, your point, I think, I do think it is increasingly of interest to a lot of people, myself included, frankly. It is much more environmentally friendly, certainly less expensive, and a lot of the I don't want to get funeral directors all upset because a lot of the expense is
Mhm.
kind of unnecessary. But the designated area is something I think a lot of cemeteries, a lot of towns have picked up on, and it creates fewer issues in terms of mapping,
Mhm.
plot purchases, etc.
Ned, just can you pick up some of the chats that are in there?
Yes, there was a question about the green burials being a planning board jurisdiction, and John Bergeron answered no.
Okay.
Okay.
Let me just make sure there's no other questions.
Any other business? Thanks, everybody, for coming. We have a motion, make a motion to go to non-public.
I will make a motion to go into non-public.
All in favor?
Aye.
Again, thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you, guys. Informative meeting tonight. A lot of different stuff.
So I wanted to mention, I had Corey this morning and he was expecting. He was expecting some bring on the Lotteries program at the time.